In 1975, a simple blind taste test in shopping malls across America triggered an economic shockwave that would permanently alter global capitalism. Shoppers were handed 2 unbranded cups of cola, asked to take a sip, and forced to declare a winner. The results of this seemingly innocent marketing stunt, famously known as the Pepsi Challenge, revealed a startling truth. Consumers consistently preferred the sweeter taste of the underdog over the established industry giant. But this was never just about sugar, carbonated water, and caramel coloring. It was the ignition sequence for a multi-billion-dollar corporate conflict. This localized experiment exposed a vulnerability in a century-old monopoly, proving that even the most entrenched market leaders could be challenged. Examining the cola wars reveals a masterclass in business strategy beyond just taste. Coca-Cola and PepsiCo built their sprawling empires not merely by brewing better beverages, but by engineering unprecedented distribution networks, pioneering psychological marketing, and executing aggressive market penetration tactics. These 2 entities transformed a simple, low-cost refreshment into a high-stakes battleground for global dominance. Their relentless competition forced innovations that rippled outward, rewriting the rules of modern commerce. The strategies deployed in this rivalry became the foundational textbooks for modern corporate warfare, illustrating how companies can manufacture demand out of thin air. The immediate battlefield was the American supermarket aisle, but the ultimate prize was absolute control over consumer habits and discretionary income. The financial stakes were staggering. A mere 1.5% shift in market share translated to hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue. This zero-sum game meant that one company's financial triumph was inherently tied to the other's direct loss. To secure these razor-thin margins, both corporations had to look past the physical liquid in the bottle and focus entirely on the psychology of the person buying it. To comprehend the gravity of this economic rivalry, one must look back to the early 20th century when Coca-Cola established a virtual monopoly on American nostalgia. Through aggressive early expansion and iconic advertising that intertwined the beverage with national identity, the Atlanta-based company became an undisputed titan. It was a cultural fixture, deeply embedded in the daily routines of millions and backed by a formidable balance sheet. For decades, competitors were viewed as nothing more than minor annoyances, easily crushed by superior capital, unmatched brand recognition, and economies of scale. PepsiCo, initially a struggling entity that had faced bankruptcy multiple times, realized it could never win a direct frontal assault against such an entrenched monopoly. They had to rewrite the rules of economic engagement. Unable to outspend the giant in sheer advertising volume or match their production output, they outmaneuvered them through strategic pricing and precise demographic targeting. By offering a larger 12-ounce bottle for the same 5-cent price during the Great Depression, they established a foothold as the value brand, surviving long enough to build a sustainable revenue model. The true paradigm shift occurred when the focus moved from the product's utility to the identity of the consumer. The introduction of the Pepsi Generation campaign in the 1960s was a watershed moment in the history of consumer psychology. It stopped selling the beverage's attributes and started selling youth, rebellion, and a distinct lifestyle. It was no longer about what was in the bottle, but the perceived social status of whoever was holding it. This psychological pivot forced consumers to align their personal identity with a corporate brand, a tactic that fundamentally changed marketing forever. This ideological warfare forced a massive structural response from the industry leader. As the underdog's market share began to steadily climb, eroding the monopoly's dominance, panic set in at the highest levels of corporate management. The relentless financial pressure of the Pepsi Challenge and the shifting cultural zeitgeist resulted in a catastrophic miscalculation. The need to protect their primary revenue stream led to one of the most infamous and heavily scrutinized corporate decisions in modern business history. In 1985, Coca-Cola launched New Coke, a desperate defensive maneuver disguised as bold product innovation. The company fundamentally altered its century-old secret formula to mimic the sweeter taste profile of its rival, attempting to win back the taste test demographic. It was a calculated, data-driven risk backed by hundreds of thousands of blind taste tests that confirmed a preference for the new flavor. Yet the corporate executives catastrophically misjudged the deep, emotional equity consumers had forged with the original brand over generations. The immediate market backlash was visceral, forcing a rapid and humiliating reversal just 79 days later. However, this monumental blunder inadvertently restabilized the company's financial dominance. The return of Coca-Cola Classic resulted in a massive surge in sales, proving a vital economic principle. Brand equity and consumer loyalty could completely override empirical product formulation. The market demonstrated that emotional connection and historical nostalgia were far more valuable financial assets than a slight preference in a blind, scientific taste test. While these high-profile marketing battles captured the public's attention and dominated headlines, the true war was being waged silently within the supply chain. Bottling and distribution logistics became the invisible, heavy-lifting engines of corporate growth. The ability to manufacture immense consumer demand was entirely useless without the physical infrastructure to supply it efficiently to every corner of the country. Mastery of the supply chain became the ultimate barrier to entry for any potential third competitor. Both companies refined the franchise bottling model to an art form, a strategy that allowed them to offload capital-intensive manufacturing. By selling concentrated syrup to independent, localized bottlers, the parent corporations retained control over the high-margin intellectual property. Simultaneously, they pushed the massive costs of factories, delivery trucks, and localized labor onto third parties. This decentralized, asset-light system enabled rapid, scalable expansion across the continent without crippling the parent company's balance sheet with heavy capital expenditures. Securing exclusive rights in restaurants, movie theaters, and fountain dispensers became the next critical frontier in this distribution war. These partnerships locked in guaranteed, recurring revenue streams and completely shut out the competition at the point of sale. The fight for fast food contracts became intensely aggressive, often involving massive upfront capital injections or heavy subsidies. When a major international burger chain signed an exclusivity agreement with one cola brand, it instantly shifted billions of dollars in long-term sales, cementing distribution as a weapon of mass market control. As domestic markets reached absolute saturation points in the late 20th century, the conflict inevitably escalated to a global scale. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the opening of previously closed, state-run economies presented vast, untapped territories. The race to colonize these emerging markets with carbonated sugar water became a proxy for Western capitalist expansion. Establishing a first-mover advantage in these new territories was critical for securing future decades of international revenue growth. The lengths to which these corporate entities went to secure international footholds bordered on the surreal. Decades earlier, Pepsi had managed to pierce the Iron Curtain, securing a monopoly in the Soviet Union through a complex, unprecedented barter system. Because the Soviet ruble was not an internationally tradable currency, the company exchanged its syrup for Stolichnaya vodka and eventually a fleet of decommissioned Soviet naval warships, including submarines and destroyers. It was a stark testament to the extreme geopolitical maneuvers required to capture emerging, illiquid markets. Coca-Cola retaliated aggressively in the post-Cold War era by leveraging its massive capital reserves to flood Eastern Europe, Asia, and Africa with infrastructure. They did not just export finished products, they exported entire supply chains. By purchasing local bottling plants, investing in regional distribution fleets, and blanketing remote villages with branded, electricity-subsidized coolers, they established an inescapable physical presence. They understood that localized availability and cold drink infrastructure were the ultimate drivers of global consumption. This international arms race transformed both entities into sprawling multinational conglomerates. Their revenue streams became heavily diversified across geographic borders, insulating them from regional economic downturns. If sales slumped during a recession in North America, explosive growth in Latin America or the Asia-Pacific region could balance the global ledger. Global market share was no longer just a metric of competitive success. It was a necessary financial hedge against macroeconomic volatility and currency fluctuations. However, the turn of the millennium introduced a new, existential threat that neither company could simply market its way out of. Changing consumer health trends and a growing scientific awareness of the link between sugar consumption and chronic disease began to erode the core foundation of their empires. The demand for sugary carbonated beverages entered a slow, terminal decline in developed nations, threatening the primary revenue engines of both corporations. Survival required radical adaptation and a complete redefinition of their corporate identities. Both giants initiated aggressive, multi-billion-dollar acquisition strategies to pivot away from their namesake products. They transformed into total beverage companies, buying up bottled water brands, sports drinks, teas, and functional health beverages. The underlying financial strategy was to ensure that regardless of what a health-conscious consumer chose to drink, the revenue would ultimately flow back to the same central corporate treasury. PepsiCo had a distinct structural advantage in this new era, having executed a crucial merger with Frito-Lay decades earlier. This massive diversification into snack foods provided an incredible financial buffer, proving that a broader corporate portfolio could absorb systemic shocks in the core beverage market. Coca-Cola, while remaining strictly focused on liquids, aggressively expanded its non-carbonated acquisitions, securing massive market share in the juice and fortified water sectors to offset the steady decline in traditional soda sales. Today, the legacy of this intense rivalry extends far beyond the beverage aisle. The tactics pioneered during the Cola Wars laid the foundational architecture for modern brand management, global supply chain logistics, and consumer psychology. The relentless drive to outmaneuver a single, dedicated opponent accelerated business innovations that are now standard practice across every major consumer goods industry, from technology to fast fashion. The competition between these two titans forced a continuous evolution of business strategy. They demonstrated how intangible assets like brand loyalty can hold immense financial weight, and how mastering the physical realities of distribution can secure global dominance. The fight for our thirst did more than just fill supermarket shelves. It inadvertently built the blueprint for modern global commerce, proving that the most profound economic shifts often begin with the simplest of consumer choices.